Hello people, and welcome to the People Building Podcast in our very first episode of the Extraordinary People series. And our very first extraordinary person is the lovely, wonderful Jon Mclernon. Firstly, I would like to apologise that there has been a really rather significant delay in getting this episode out to you. Let me explain why. In the very last podcast that I hosted, I mentioned that there was going to be a change in the format, and some of that was to accommodate my crazy life, because not only do I run 3 companies, but I'm also a carer for my sister, and I think I mentioned in some detail about my mum who has a rare brain disease. Well, since I recorded that last show, my mum passed away. She passed away a couple of weeks ago, and I'm currently in that weird space between her passing and the upcoming funeral, and it kind of just made life go a little bit sideways. So I'm just now getting back into the groove of working again and, kind of carving out a new plan for myself, because on a practical level, that had been a significant investment of my time and really just my mental energy and emotional energy was going towards caring about my mum. So I'm hoping that once the grief has passed, and as I begin to, what is it the government would say, like, start my new normal, actually things will start to get easier and maybe also a little bit more fun. So thank you for your patience, and I apologise for the delay in the uploading. Now, Jon is going to dive deep into sharing his story with you on today's show. There's a few things that I want to really have your ears prick up when you hear them. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you're also going to see some of the facial expressions that show up around particular subject areas. And I'm also giving you a trigger warning on this one. So let me tell you a little bit about what is coming up in this episode. Jon is going to tell us his experience of struggling with addiction. Now, this addiction that he developed was an addiction to food. It was very, very real. And it came about because of an attempted murder. Jon was really in a very dangerous situation where, in his mind and in all reality, he came very, very close to losing his life. And I'm not going to reveal any more about that. You're going to hear about it in this podcast today. But what I will say is that when he comes to that part of his story, if you can, and this is a low-level trigger warning, I feel, but I would like you to make sure that you do not judge his story until you've heard the whole 360 on the story. So there is a part of our conversation which starts to deal with race. And I know that that will generate a very interesting dialogue in the comments section for this particular YouTube video, or if you're listening on one of our podcasting platforms, or if you just want to head on over to the blog and leave a comment there about it, you are very welcome to do so. I encourage you, however, to make sure that you take into consideration the entire context that he gives us around the further discussion that we have in respect of race, because Jon develops some fears, some very real fears based on an ethnic group in a specific set of circumstances, not across the board, okay, in a very specific set of circumstances. And when you take the entire situation into consideration, I think you can understand why that would happen. I certainly did. So we asked some uncomfortable questions and we got answers to some uncomfortable questions. And I really respect and appreciate the honesty that he shared in this podcast episode. There are three other really significant things that I think show up in this conversation. One is around a description that Jon gives us in his relationship with food. One is around the change in mindset that he experienced. And the third one is his approach now to dealing with that old addiction that he had. And I'm going to revisit those 3 points on the other side of the podcast, but I wanted to flag them up in advance so that you know which significant bits I think you should really be listening out for, where there is some great learning in there. But for now, and without further ado, I am going to hand over to Gemma from the past, where we will be sharing an extraordinary life of Jon Mclernon. I was just reading some of your testimonials on your website before you showed up there, and they're amazing. Like some of the before and after pictures from people as well are just really incredible.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, I guess I could say like I am good at what I do.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm passionate about what I do as well.
That's really
because
good.
I have my own journey, right? And so I think when we live something, it's a little bit it's different when you enter into the human experience of having lived something versus say read a book about it and learned how to help people from a textbook. Yeah, and I think that's what creates like a connection with the clients that I work with that you can't really replicate just from studying something in a textbook.
100%, and you can see that really comes through in what they say about you. I was just reading this one here. Sergio, what was Sergio saying? Jon is the first nutritionist who I felt truly understood my challenges and took the time to get to know me, my past, and to get a better understanding of what didn't work for me to avoid any negative repeatable behaviors. It's like wow, like those are, that those are really good quality testimonials because people have really thought about what worked for them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
You're clearly very good at what you do. Well done, you.
Thank you. Well, I say I'm a world-class coach, but nobody knows who I am yet.
Yet, that's the thing.
Yeah, all things in due time. I'm not in a hurry, but because it took me a long time to get to the place where I was comfortable doing what I feel is my calling to do as well. I think I kind of ran from it for a long time, and maybe not necessarily always deliberately either, but yeah. I think there just is that element of it when we recognize what we're actually capable of, that it's like, oh my gosh, it's exciting on one hand, but it's also scary on the other hand because you go, okay, there's like a lot of potential here. Yeah,
absolutely. The fear of your own greatness.
Yeah.
Okay, people, I have Coach Jon here with us today. He is a weight loss coach and emotional eating expert who himself lost 100 pounds. That's like a whole person, right? So from nanotechnology researcher to Navy Marine engineer to globe-trotting nomad, Coach Jon spent most of his life running from his true calling until one question changed his life. Oh, we need to know what that is. Now he's on a mission to help others lose weight for good and leave BS diets in the rearview mirror. With Freedom Nutrition Coaching, he marries the science of metabolism with the psychology of behavior change and the compassion of human connection to create life-changing transformations with his clients. Welcome, Jon.
Hey, thanks so much. And I love hearing, I guess, a bio about me read in a different accent. So I mean, probably for you, like, you're used to your accent. And I've traveled a lot, and I've spent lots of time in the UK, and my wife is Australian. But
okay.
I mean, I still live in Canada and hear Canadian accents most of the time, so it's always nice to hear it in a different accent. So.
Well, you'll have to use me as a voiceover or something on your website somewhere.
Yeah. You could have a secondary career doing that. Or maybe
thank you so much. All right, I want to start at the very beginning with you because it sounds like you were not always a dietitian. What do you call yourself? Nutrition coach? Is that the right thing?
Yeah, I mean, technically I'm a nutritionist, but I like the
Okay.
term nutrition coach because when people think of a nutritionist, they think of someone who's handing them a meal plan and sort of telling them what to
Yeah.
do. And the term coach is more like I'm going to work collaboratively with somebody,
Yep.
but still allow them to be the expert of their own experience.
Yeah, love that, definitely. So, all right, let's go way back. Did you grow up in Canada?
I did, yeah. So, I
Okay.
mean, I had an interesting start in life because I was born at 26 weeks.
Oh,
So
that's tiny.
yeah, I was 2 pounds 9 ounces, so maybe for 26
Oh,
weeks I was big,
oh,
um, but for a baby like that wasn't very big. And then I went down
yeah,
to 2 pounds 1 ounce because babies lose a bit of fluid after birth.
sure.
Um, I probably wouldn't be here today except that my dad had the presence of mind to perform CPR with his pinky finger because I was born
Wowzers.
at home. Yeah, and
Oh
he
my
used a syringe
goodness.
to unplug my nose. And
Oh,
of course, I don't remember any of this, but
no.
I hear the stories, and I think as I'm older, I appreciate it now,
Yeah,
because I'd heard the story so many times that I kind of just took it for granted. But
yeah.
now that I'm a parent, I go, oh my gosh, like he
It's
had the
kind of a
present.
big deal.
Yeah, it is actually, and
Yeah,
so I really owe a debt of gratitude to my dad just for that because his quick thinking
yeah.
probably because I wasn't breathing when I came out. He said I was blue.
Wowzers.
It took a little bit to kind of separate me from the placenta,
Okay.
and my eyes were shut and ears were folded over, and my mom's first
Oh,
question was, "Is it alive?" You
yeah.
know, and so he just did what he could because we lived a little bit out of the city, and so it took
Okay.
time for an ambulance to get there.
Yeah, yeah.
And so his quick thinking basically allowed me to not suffer from any major brain damage from oxygen deprivation or anything like that.
That's amazing. So I know sometimes when children are born prematurely, um, they're a bit slower at developing in other areas of their life, not because
Yep.
they're slow learners, but because, like, developmentally, they're exactly where they should be. It's just that their
Yeah.
birthday came too soon. So,
Yeah.
how did
Yeah.
that work out for you growing up? Did you, were you
Ye-
kind of like matching up to where your peers were, or did you have any like other challenges because of it?
I would say physically speaking, yeah, it was a little bit more difficult. So it's always been a bit of a joke that I have two left feet. So physical
Right.
coordination had always been kind of a challenge for me.
Yeah.
Um, but the interesting sort of flip side of it is I've also had like a very fierce independent streak.
Hmm.
Um, because I spent the first 9 weeks of my life in ICU, in NICU, like in an
Yeah.
incubator,
Yeah.
being kept alive. And so uh, normally when an infant is born, like they're very closely bonded with their parents
Yeah,
almost
of
24
course.
hours a day. And instead I was lying flat on my back, hooked up to wires and machines for 9 weeks.
Wow.
And so uh, that in a sense lends itself to being very, very independent. And
Yeah.
apparently my mom tells me I would take my bottle and I would try and like scoot away and hide behind the curtain and try and feed myself. Um, so
Wow.
somewhere in there's a little bit of a stubborn streak, but
Yeah.
yeah, so that made things physically a little bit more challenging.
Uh-huh.
Just in the sense I wasn't very coordinated. I loved sports, but I really
Yeah.
wasn't like very good at it because I was just
Mhm.
kind of awkward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know it will come up and we'll get to it. And I may be jumping ahead a little bit here, but you went on to have your own challenges around weight later
Hmm.
on in life. Do
Yeah.
you think that there was any correlation between the fact that you had the early start in life, um,
Uh,
and maybe kind of came out not as full of the nutrition that you should have had in the place that you should have had it? I mean, I guess it's a who would ever know, but has that
yeah,
ever
yeah.
occurred to you?
Oh, absolutely. I also had very poor eyesight.
Right.
I've had laser eye surgery, and
Okay.
so thankfully enjoy 20/20 vision. I'm
Yeah.
pretty glad for that. Um, and I've had digestive issues for most of my life. Nothing
Okay.
major. I don't have any diagnosed issues, but I continually kind of work with nutritionists, and I seem to tweak my diet and whatnot. So there were like little issues like that as well that may have contributed, but I'd be inclined to think more, and as we get into the story of how I got there,
Yeah.
it had more to do with maybe emotional development or lack of emotional development
Okay.
that really sort
Okay.
of contributed to my future struggles with food.
Yeah. All right. So we've got little John there in Canada. Came out a bit too soon, but basically is fiercely independent and starts living his best life. What was that like? What was it sort of growing up? What was your childhood like? You mentioned there that your food issues maybe were related to
Yeah.
emotions. So when did that start to creep in?
that probably didn't creep in until actually probably the teen years. And I will say, like,
Okay.
I'd had the benefit of having an older brother who was only 1 year older than me, so
Right.
that may have aided in some of my development because
Yeah.
I was also very competitive,
Right.
and so I was always trying to keep up with him.
Uh-huh.
And had I been the firstborn, I might have struggled with development. But
Sure.
having that influence in my life, and my brother's actually a really awesome guy, because we of course we fought, we had our competitiveness and whatnot, but
Hmm.
as he started to sort of see my potential, even
Yeah.
athletically, he started to work with me. And I ended up turning into quite a good basketball player and set a few records at my school and whatnot. So sports was a way to kind of develop but I wouldn't have done that without my brother's help. And so
Okay.
that was really helpful. But um, it's also like it's hard wearing Coke bottle glasses and having braces, um,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah.
And also like I'm pretty smart. No, I'm very smart actually. I might as well say it. I scored very high academically.
Yeah.
And part of it is again I'm very competitive,
Hmm.
but I also have a really really good brain, like a very good memory for facts and information. So academically, school wasn't that particularly challenging for me.
Yeah.
And it makes other kids feel bad. I don't know why,
Hmm.
like as an adult, But
Yeah.
so I had a lot of people like pick on me and bully me because I was scoring straight A's most of the time.
Okay.
Um, but until I grew to be a lot bigger than average, I grew to be about 6 feet tall by the time I was 13. So,
Wow.
yeah,
You
I
made
didn't.
up for lost time there.
Yeah, I'm only 6'1" though, so I didn't.
Right.
I was like, "Where's the rest of my
Yeah,
growth
that's it
spurt?" That's it,
now.
you know. And so I was actually like pretty like when sort of grew into my frame and started
Hmm.
to learn how to coordinate and whatnot. I ended up being like quite athletic and enjoyed being athletic, and that carried over into university. Although I had a car accident when I was 18 and
Okay.
injured my hip and lower back, and that sort of derailed any plans of playing collegiate level basketball.
Okay.
Um,
And had
yeah,
that been a serious plan that you were going to keep going with that? Was that kind of the direction
yeah,
you saw yourself going in? Yeah.
I definitely wanted to. And I had interest from a couple of schools, but that happened in my grade 12 year, my senior year,
Yeah.
and so because of that, like I was able to finish out the season,
Mm.
but it just kind of put a bit of a damper on my explosiveness and my ability to move laterally and things like that. So it just kind of
Okay.
took a little bit of the edge off of my athleticism,
Hmm.
and I kind of needed that to
Yeah.
be able to compete at the highest level, and so and down the road, like 20 years later, I still have issues with my hip and my back. It's sort of been a lifelong battle in one
Yeah.
sense, and
Yeah.
so it feels like I'm battling against degeneration a little bit,
Oh,
because I also have two motorcycle accidents in my past as well. So
wow.
um, yeah, I mean that sort of independent and reckless streak also led
Yeah.
me to getting into like illegal motorcycle racing for a
Damn
period
that
of time.
independence.
So yeah, I got into doing a little bit of that as well. So um,
When you
and
realized that sporting side of your life was not going to go in the direction that you'd hoped it would, was there a moment when you realized, or do you think it was more like a penny slowly dropping? How did it dawn on you?
Um, I think by the time I was ready to graduate and go, I was already accepted into university. I was like,
Hmm.
okay, it looks like I'm not going to be able to walk on and do tryouts here.
Yeah.
So I kind of made peace with that.
Okay.
I love living. I lived on my rollerblades as well,
Hmm.
and so I loved rollerblading, and I was able to sort of keep doing that. But uh, so I could cover like 40, 50 kilometers on my rollerblades kind of thing, and
Yeah.
that probably kept me fairly lean because it's not like I had good nutrition
Right.
going through my my university years. There's a lot of instant noodles and tuna and
Yeah.
beans. Maybe the tuna and beans aren't so bad actually, but it was whatever you could afford on like a student budget, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, but then you get into sort of like the eating competitions with each other. Like when there was 25-cent wing night, we'd splurge. And
That's a thing.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if it's a thing over in the UK, but over here, you get 20. Well, nowadays you probably can't get 25-cent wings unless you have to buy a bunch of booze to cover it. But back then you didn't have to. You just could buy like an iced tea or something, and
Wow.
you know. and so my record was like 76 wings, which is pretty ridiculous.
That's quite a lot of wings.
No hope I could ever do that now. Yeah.
But it sounds like you were still being quite physically active. You said about the
Yes.
rollerblading there.
Yeah.
So it's not like you had that accident and then it was, you know, you sort of went into a depression, you couldn't move, and, you know, that kind of set things off in the wrong direction. So
no, I mean, I was kind of bummed out.
Yeah.
In a sense, but I didn't really become despondent. I was just like, I kind of just accepted it. I was like, okay, it's kind of what I wanted to do, but that's not going to happen. So I need to sort of pick a different path. But yeah, you know, I mean, I look back and I said, like, I would have liked to be able to do that, but yeah, I didn't really get too hung up on it. Didn't have too many regrets about that.
Yeah, that's good. Which either means that you were already quite a resilient person, or that it was maybe a nice to have, but not a real passion.
Yeah. I mean, I was coaching basketball as well, so I was definitely passionate about the sport, and maybe coaching was a way for me to stay connected to it. So I still got to enjoy that aspect of it. But I think I was also aware that outside of university, like, there's no way I was going to be, I certainly wasn't good enough to play at a professional level. And so I kind of knew there was already a cap on my career.
Yeah.
So, and I think back then I was fairly, I mean, you might say resilient, but I think I was just more like disconnected from my emotions.
Okay.
And again, I think we could probably trace that back to even to my birth, really. My wife used to tease me and call me the Tin Man, actually.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And it's not that I didn't have emotions. Like, even as a child, I had temper tantrums, right? But that was kind of a case of emotions building up and not knowing what to do with them, and they would just kind of lead to eventually exploding and having to come out somehow. So
yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people who may express negative emotions quite successfully, but have that kind of Tin Man-esque personality, perhaps around more of the positive stuff or the connecting stuff, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Like anger, we could say is deemed as like a strong emotion, a strong masculine emotion. And so sort of in masculine culture, it's seen as, you know, that's an acceptable one.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, things like compassion and empathy and these sorts of feelings that are gentler and kinder and have a more feminine slant to them are not seen as positive in the masculine sphere, which is kind of a shame, I say, looking back at, you know, because really I'm an empath at heart.
Yeah, of course. All right. So where does that take us up to then? So you've eaten 75 chicken wings. And
76, but yeah, who's counting at that point? Yeah. And it was a pretty cheap meal, actually. Like, that was like less than $30, and that was a lot of food. Yeah, so I was studying nanotechnology research at University of Victoria, kind of being groomed to join, like, I was already in the research group and sort of being groomed to move into the PhD program.
Okay. What was your plan with that? I mean, that sounds like a real, quite heavy niche area to go into. What was the plan with that?
I didn't really have one, honestly.
Okay. Let's just look at the nanos and see where we go.
Well, it started with just looking for a job, like a job to help pay for university. And it was a job that was relevant because chemistry was my major. And then again, I was again pretty good at it. And so I was working on developing blue light emitting nanoparticles. So this is pre-Blu-ray. So we weren't the only research group looking for this, but ultimately I kind of started to get bored of it.
Okay.
Because it's kind of like, research is what I call like success through failure. Just, you know, you try this and try this and try this, and it doesn't work, till eventually you have a breakthrough, and then it's like, okay, let's go to the next thing. And I wasn't really emotionally mature enough to sort of handle that. I found it very, very frustrating because I was kind of numbers and results oriented, and so I was like, I need something more. And so the thought of spending another 4 years like doing this at that point in time, like, I wasn't really mature enough to see that probably getting a PhD would have been good, but so the thought of spending 4 more years doing that, really, I didn't like that idea. So I decided on a whim to join the Navy.
Okay. Big change. So just to rewind you a tiny bit, do you think it was because the results weren't coming through? Like, if you were doing it and you were getting a good result from it, there would have been that sort of, you know, reward.
Yeah, it was kind of a tall task that we were working on. And so it was, you got to run a lot of experiments, and they're fairly time consuming to run,
Yeah.
and a lot of data to sift through. And yeah, it just really wasn't seeing the breakthroughs I wanted to, and wasn't seeing the results that I wanted to. And so maybe I took that personally and thought that somehow I was a failure. But I think I was also just frustrated by the pace of getting results or not getting results.
Yeah.
And so by chance, I happened to meet a guy in downtown Victoria who was doing boot camp. And I was like, I like a challenge. You know, I'd like to see where I'm at. And so I went down to the recruiting office and decided to join the Navy. And yeah, so then I finished up university and then just started in the Navy. Like,
and what did your family say about that? Were they supportive of that decision? Was that not where they expected you to go? Or okay.
I mean, to be fair, my parents weren't putting. I wasn't like they weren't putting any pressure on me to get any sort of particular educational outcome or anything like that. So they were really good in that way.
Yeah.
It's more a case of, you know, you join the military and there is always that element of, okay, you join the military, you might actually end up in armed conflict. And that can be problematic. And most parents don't like the thought of their children being in armed conflict. So.
And was there any military background in your family at all, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not like my dad. He'd only spent a little bit of time in the Army Reserves when he was growing up in Australia in his teen years, and that was a requirement because the Vietnam War was happening at that time. But my grandfather served in World War II. He was captured by the Germans and was a prisoner of war. And unfortunately, that kind of left him damaged. I didn't have a relationship with him.
That's sad.
My gran was an ambulance driver in northern France.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was kind of that history there, and so my gran, in a sense, she was kind of like proud of the fact that I'd joined the military, and sort of carrying a little bit of family history. But for my parents, they were more thinking like, you know, we don't want you getting caught up in some stupid conflict, you know.
Yeah. Okay. So what happened next?
Well, I spent about 3 years in the Navy, and somewhere along the way, actually early into that time, I met a girl that would become my wife. I didn't know it at the time, of course. I just met her. She's from Australia. She got dumped to my lap, actually. Some friends of mine had met her in Vancouver and said, "Hey, why don't we show you Vancouver Island?" And where I lived at the time in the city of Victoria, and so. They brought her to Victoria and called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to show this cute Aussie girl around?" I'm like, "Yeah." what 21-year-old guy doesn't want
to love here?
Yeah, exactly. And so we hung out for kind of 2.5 days. Like, she was staying with somebody else, but we kind of hung out for 2.5 days. Really hit it off. There was clearly some chemistry there, but I thought I'd never see her again. You know, and this is pre-social media, pre-Facebook, and all that. But she handed me a Gumtree note. With her email address on it.
Aww.
And so it said a Gumtree note from Michelle, you know. And so anyways, we kind of just started emailing back and forth. And so during this period of time in the Navy...
was she in the Navy too? What was she doing?
No, she was just traveling around the world. So she, at 18, she decided to do this world tour herself. So she bought one of those round-the-world tickets.
Right.
Spent quite a bit of time in the UK, I think in Norwich, at some kids camp up there. And so anyways, as a part of her, I think she had to stop in Vancouver, and then she had to stop down in Mexico because her sister was living in Mexico at the time, before going back to Australia. And so it was really random chance that we met, honestly. But we started emailing kind of back and forth, and MSN Messenger was kind of just recently launched.
I remember that.
Yeah. So we started communicating on MSN Messenger, and eventually one time. This is sort of bridging the time that I was in university and going into the Navy, because I was still finishing up my university and in the Navy Reserves at the time. Okay. And so the time difference was like 7 hours. So she'd be at like midnight, I'd be at like 7 a.m. Yeah. And we'd be communicating. One day we communicated for like 15 hours.
Oh, wow.
So it was pretty clear that like there was something going on.
There was something going on there, yeah.
Yeah, and like I'd at that point, I think, broken up with a girlfriend that I'd had, and so anyways, I convinced her to come back to Canada. Okay. Well, I mean, because her mom was like, you know, because she'd had a boyfriend too. It was a really bad relationship. He was not a nice guy. He isn't a nice guy. Probably a sociopath, looking back at the behavior pattern, kind of thing, or like a narcissist. And so anyways, her mom was pointed out, like, you talk for 15 minutes to your boyfriend and you end up crying, and you talk to this guy in Canada for 3 hours and you can't stop laughing. So, you know, can you see the difference here? Yeah. So, yeah, it was kind of funny because she, you know, I hadn't, like there was no social media. She hadn't sent me any pictures.
Uh-huh.
I hadn't seen her for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
She mailed one picture to me, and it was like an older picture.
Yeah.
And so here she is. She's like, I'm flying back to Canada. It was, I think, like the 30th of June. This is going back to 2005. Flying back to Canada. I'm like, how am I going to know? Like, this is like, this is July, Vancouver Airport, one of the busiest international airports in the busiest time of year. I'm like, how the heck am I ever going to find you when I don't even know what you look like, you know? And she said, oh, I'll wear a colorful hat or something, you know, so you'll be able to spot me. So I'm at the airport, and it's probably like it feels like it's the busiest day of the year. And, you know, Vancouver Airport has sort of, like most airports, you kind of come out of the customs and there's kind of a barricade, and you kind of have to work around the barricade to get to like these people. And the doors open, and out comes this girl in a Tigger costume.
I love her.
yeah, and she's, but she didn't see me at first, and so.
But you definitely saw her.
I was like, okay, I know who that is. And so she's like looking around, thinking to herself, like, this guy better be here. Like, I didn't just fly halfway around the world, you know, put on a Tigger costume and come out at the airport for him. She
wasn't like it on the aeroplane. She wasn't like bouncing up and down the aisle.
No. It was pretty cool, actually. So anyways, someone had stopped her to be like, hey, why are you there? And then, you know, she turned around, there I was, and she jumped into my arms, and, you know, everybody cheered, and we had like our first kiss at the airport. It was kind of like this movie moment, actually.
Awesome. That's so lovely.
Yeah. And it was really good timing, because I actually just had my second motorcycle accident.
Okay.
And because I was still recovering from that, I was on light duty with the military.
Right.
And that meant that I wasn't allowed to be posted onto a ship, because with an ankle injury, you can't be on an unstable platform. And so they just plugged me into the office for like 2 hours a day to like answer a phone that didn't ring, because they had to put me somewhere. Yeah. And so that allowed us to spend a lot of time together in the very early stages of our relationship. And so we definitely, we did. And we'd had 2.5 years of connecting through email, phone, MSN Messenger, you know, phone cards back in the day. You know, you pay your 69-cent connection fee, and then you pay 1.7 cents a minute or whatever it is, you know. And so in 4 months' time, we ended up getting engaged. So I blindfolded her, drove her all around the city so she didn't know where we were, brought her to the steps of a castle that we have in the city, and proposed to her there. So,
and had you talked about it? Did she know that was going to happen, or was it a big surprise?
I wouldn't say it came as a huge surprise. Like, I think both of us knew, like, because 4 months together dating doesn't seem like a long time, but we had sort of 2.5 years of building a friendship. Yeah. And so we kind of knew. We hadn't necessarily talked about it, but I think we both had this sense of this is where we're headed. Yeah. And so, she said yes. And she ended up going back to Australia. Okay. About a month after that. And then I had to finish out my contract with the Navy. So I had 2 more months before I could get back to Australia to see her. And then we stayed over there for a year. We got married over there. Loved living in Australia. It was a great time. Yeah. And then I came back and did 3 more years in the Navy. Okay.
Did she stay back in Australia whilst you did that?
No, she came back to Canada. But it's really tough being in the military and being married. I say the military breeds divorced alcoholics. And so 3 years of that, and it was like enough of that. Like, I was gone a lot, and she is halfway around the world. Like, didn't have a lot of friends because she was relatively new to the city, newly married, and I get shipped off kind of thing. And so, you know, I came home one day and I said, like, look, you know, we always talk about traveling the world. We've done a couple trips, but why don't we do this for real? Yeah. And let's go teach English somewhere. And so that started the ball in motion. You know, I finished out my contract with the Navy. I didn't renew, and we hopped on a plane for Mexico. And I didn't really have a plan. We thought, okay, well, maybe we're going to go for like 6 months or something like that. Yeah. And it ended up being like a 3-year globetrotting adventure.
Wowzers.
Where we went all over the place. And now in hindsight, I'm so glad we did that, because you know, travel is going to look a whole lot different nowadays. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, definitely. So what did you do in those 3 years that you were traveling?
So we spent about 6 months living in Mexico, teaching English there. But things were starting to heat up a little bit down there in terms of the cartel government conflict. Yeah. And clearly, like, I'm just about translucent, so I'm clearly not Mexican, which, you know, could make us, and we weren't living in a touristy area. Right. So it was
but you might stand out, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my wife has sort of dark blonde hair, and so yeah, she's clearly not Mexican either.
Yeah.
And look, the average Mexicans are very friendly and hospitable. Like that part of it we love. Like they're so warm and friendly. But there is the undercurrent there that you might get kidnapped and held for ransom.
Yeah.
And so as things started to, because we made some friends, some local teachers and stuff like that, and we became friends with them, and they kind of looked out for us and stuff like that. But like there came a point where we were getting the sense of, okay, things are starting to heat up a bit here. There's a little bit more violence picking up on our city. Maybe it's time to leave. And so we did. So we hopped on a plane, flew over to the UK because my sister-in-law was living in London at the time.
Okay.
And so and then we headed over to Italy and started teaching English at children's camps there.
Lovely.
Yeah. And then we ended up going to Poland. So after summer in Italy, we went to Turkey to visit my brother because he's been living in Turkey now for about 12 years, 13 years. And so we went to visit him over there, hopped around Greece a bit, and then went and started teaching English in Poland.
Yeah.
Poland's a very interesting country because the language is extremely difficult. The people are not hospitable and warm, and they're not forgiving when you try to learn the language. I call it the communist hangover, right? It's kind of an Eastern European cultural thing. They knew immediately that we're not Polish because we don't walk around like we carried the weight of the world on our shoulders. We had smiles and we're friendly, and they're like, "You clearly haven't lived under communism."
So I have a holiday home in Bulgaria, and the people there are lovely, but you have to defrost them first is what I like to say.
That's exactly the same in Poland. Yeah. Once you make a friend, you'll have a friend for life. Like once you earn their trust, you'll have their loyalty. But it takes a little bit of time to get them to warm up. So
yeah. And did you stay close to your family whilst you did all this traveling? Because it sounded like you'd had good connections with the family up until that point.
I would say yes and no. Like, I mean, I feel bad for especially for my mom during this stretch of my life because I was kind of the son that was like, I'll call you if something's wrong. If I don't call, things are probably okay. And my mom by nature is a worrywart. And so, and again, that's sort of my sort of being emotionally a little bit disconnected or, and just wanting to go and live my life. And I think maybe it's a male trait. Like we want to sort of go out and find our way in the world, that kind of thing. It's not that I don't love my parents. I certainly do. Sure. But I just had this sort of independent streak coming out. And I was but my parents actually came and visited us when we were living in Poland. Okay. Yeah, it was kind of neat. Again, we didn't live in a touristy area of Poland. We kind of just lived in this industrial city that most people wouldn't ever go visit. And like if you ended up there was a problem. And there was even times where we would like book train tickets back to our city, and they'd be like, no, sorry, you're looking for this city over here. We're like, no, we're not. We're looking for the city was called Wrocław. We're like, no, we want to go to Wrocław, and they thought we wanted to go to Wrocław, which is more of a touristy city. It's quite an artistic and cultural city. And like, you want to go there? And we're like, no, we don't. We want to go to Wrocław. We live there, And my Polish was pretty rusty, right? So trying to communicate, and so on. But it was a really good experience. But a minor detail, well, actually probably a major detail, really. When we were living in Mexico, we'd met a guy from South Africa. He was living in the same sort of hacienda that we were.
Okay.
And so he came to Poland to teach with us for a bit. Okay. But he had some issues being South African. He had some issues with his visa and wasn't able to stay in Poland. And he's like, when you guys finish teaching here, come down to South Africa. My parents run this program called Hospitality Youth Initiative, and they teach life skills to underprivileged young people to help them, become more employable. Yeah. And you guys would be like a perfect fit for what we do because he kind of got to know us, our teaching style, that kind of stuff. We're very outgoing. And ultimately, that's what we ended up doing. So we left Poland and we went down to South Africa, and that's where things in my story take a bit of a turn for the worse.
Dum dum dum.
Yeah. So South Africa is quite a violent country.
Yes.
We didn't go down there like stupid or naive. Like we by this point we're pretty seasoned travelers. We've been around. We've seen quite a few countries already. We're aware that we have to keep our wits about us, but it's like it doesn't matter. At some point in time, like it's unavoidable. You do enough of this, something's going to happen. At this point, the worst that really happened because we thought we were going to get robbed in Mexico, and it never happened. We were prepared for that fact, actually. Yeah. But the worst thing that happened was I got my a change coin purse like picked out of my pocket in Prague. Okay. because we always watch each other's backs. We were very everything. We knew how to travel and not get stuff taken out of our pockets, basically. But I'd always kept like a little bit of loose change in my pocket for transit fare, and so somebody, the little bump when you're getting off there, somebody got it off me in Prague, which was a bit of a pain. But anyway, so down in South Africa, we started working for this company, and we were teaching underprivileged young people out on our nature reserve, and it was about 40 minutes drive away from the city of Grahamstown in the Eastern Cape, and it was down there one night. So the layout of the reserve is like it's quite this big area. There's wildlife on there and whatnot. There's rangers and so on, but there's like the educational building, there's a dormitory, there's bathrooms, all kind of in a line, and then tucked off to the side in like an L shape in the trees is like the instructor's cabin. So it's actually a really beautiful setting. Like the monkeys, they were cute, but also a giant pain in the butt. Like legit, they'll if they could break in, they'll crap on your stuff and steal shiny things and stuff like that. So they were the vervet monkeys, so they had like the old man face. Yeah. So it's this really kind of like nice setting. They had a couple of rhinos there.
And was it quite a secure place? Because quite often when you hear about places in South Africa, they are like fortresses,
Well,
and
we kind of thought it was a secure place, but it was one night I was walking back to my cabin and the door was ajar, and it didn't really twig. I was like, oh, maybe I just didn't shut it, because we're out in a nature reserve, middle of nowhere. There's rangers, all this kind of stuff. Open the door and there's three guys in the cabin, and they're actually drinking rooibos tea and eating my rusks. Rusks are this hard.
Wow, they made themselves at home.
Yeah, so they'd already ransacked the place, and they weren't expecting me to come back at that moment in time. I'd kind of caught them off guard.
You were by yourself, or there were
others?
Okay.
No, so my wife was with, and there was another facilitator and my wife. They were all with the students in the dining hall. I just happened to finish dinner early and be walking back to the cabin. I was like, and I'm in my flip-flops and like sweatpants and t-shirt, just as relaxing can be, like having a great time, like really connecting with their students, loving the work that we're doing. Not a care in the world. And here we are in a nature reserve, like, and I see these three guys in there doing this, but I recognize one of their faces, because he's one of the rangers, but he wasn't in uniform. And so that made me a little bit confused too. I was like, "What? What are you doing in here?" I didn't see the fourth guy outside the building, who then cracked me over the head with a rock. And so that was the first, like, okay, something's seriously wrong here. But it's kind of hard to process that, like the first hit. Like I'm stunned, both like literally and like in denial, like what's happening right now. This isn't happening to me, as I'm like seeing stars and blood starting to dribble into my eyes, and the others, they jumped up and I got hit again and knocked down, and then they started to basically stomp me, and the ultimate goal is to beat me to death.
Do you think their goal was to kill you or to make you unconscious?
No, to beat me to death, because they did it to a guy the night before. They beat a guy to death the night before. Now, this happened on a Monday night, and so the weekend we'd been out back in Grahamstown, because we'd go away for the weekend and then come back to the reserve on the Monday morning. And we look back, and there's things that should have stood out to us. Like but we, again, you don't know to look for these things. There was a helicopter flying overhead. They were already searching for these guys. But we didn't know that. We went to our cabin. We're like, man, our cabin's a little bit messy. We'll have to talk, about the weekend facilitator and just let them know, maybe leave our cabin a bit tidier. They probably already went searching through the cabin looking for stuff. And hadn't found it because we weren't there. But the ranger would have tipped them off, because South Africa, like, there's like an underground network of like spies and thieves and things like that. But they'd beat to death a guy the night before.
Wow. And I guess you found that out later, right? Yes. Or had you heard something about, something?
No, well, the police let it slip.
Okay.
And I was like, so down there's a lot of incompetence with the police and a lot of corruption. And so, later we're kind of like, it never like occurred to you. Like we ended up getting trapped in the building, kind of held hostage for a period of time, because it took, we were lucky that someone happened to pick up the phone when someone rang the police.
So hang on, I'm going to pause you and I'm going to rewind you. Right. You are on the floor and Did they
on
knock
the
you
ground,
out?
yeah.
Yeah. So
No, they didn't manage to knock me out.
okay.
I have
So
a thick skull.
what happened next? Who found you, or where did you end up next?
No, I managed to fight my way back to my feet.
Wowzers.
Yeah, I'm a pretty big guy.
So it
So I
was
have,
you against four guys,
yeah,
and in that
concussed and
moment
bleeding.
you were like, I ain't having any of this. So
I
all right.
managed to kind of stumble and make a bit of a run for
Yeah.
the dining hall where everybody else was. And
Okay.
for whatever reason, they didn't pursue me. They could have, because it wasn't
Yeah.
like I was moving quickly.
Yeah.
But maybe so I don't know why they didn't.
Maybe they just knew the gig was up at that point.
Not hard to tell.
Yeah.
Because they would like they would have just beat me to death, and it had nothing to do with me. Like they didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
It was purely that like my skin color. I'm a white guy.
Yeah.
And so I say, in terms of kind of explaining some of their behavior, that this pattern of behavior of like wanting to beat somebody to death is really about taking back something from something they feel had historically oppressed them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I stumbled back to the building. I've been attacked, and blood's on my face is covered in blood, and so all of a sudden like chaos ensues, because there's 25 students plus myself, my wife, and one other facilitator.
Yeah.
And so we barricade the doors. We don't know how many people are out there, because they can travel in roving packs of 10, 15 kind of thing. So we didn't know how many were out there. And then they were trying to get into the building. We started boiling water, or my wife had them boiling water. I had a fork. Like, I was concussed and stunned and still trying to figure out what was going on, but I was going to defend myself with a fork, I guess. And I'm just glad they didn't have guns, because they would have just shot us like through the windows.
Yes.
Just picked us off one by one, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so anyways, but they were trying to break down the doors. They were smashing them with shovels and things. And had we known like how many were out there, like if they'd got in, like they probably actually would have been killed, because there was enough of us in there that would have like attacked them in turn.
Yeah.
But anyways, the cops showed up finally. And the annoying part is, you kind of have to you can kind of see over the other side of the valley where the entrance is, so you could see the flashing lights like 20 minutes away from the time. So they just kind of melted into the bushes.
Okay.
In this nature reserve, like they'd cut a hole in the fence with like box cutters or something like that. It's somewhere on the fence line. And so the cops show up and they're like, oh, nobody died and nobody got raped. Okay, cool. We're out of here. And my wife was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, my husband nearly died, and you're not going to take statements from anybody, and so on. And so she was really brave in all of this, and was like, you guys aren't leaving. Because they were just going to leave and be like, you guys can just, they're fine, they're gone. And she's like, are you idiots? Like, they're not gone.
No.
They were here like 10 minutes ago. They're not very far away from these buildings. And none of us are staying out here tonight. And you're not leaving until we're gone. So she really stood up and was like, yeah. It was very brave in all of this. I mean, it was traumatic for her too, right? Just
of course.
Seeing your husband like, badly beaten and bruised and bloodied, and, but so anyways, they found one of the knives they had, and the cop just picked it up bare hand, and found another thing they dropped, picks it up bare hand, just completely contaminating all the evidence. It was like the incompetence is kind of staggering, really, from what we're used to.
Yes.
And anyways,
where was your head at throughout all of that period of time? You've got your wife doing a grand job making sure that this gets properly investigated. You've taken a bit of a beating and are probably somewhat concussed at that point. Like, where was your head at by that stage?
Well, I knew I needed to get to the hospital and kind of get checked out. And I had a concussion. And I didn't need to get stitched up, thankfully.
Okay.
The forehead bleeds pretty easily. They just missed my eye. Actually, I have a scar. People won't be able to see it, but I have a little scar next to my eye where they just missed it.
Okay.
And so I didn't have any broken bones. Like, if they'd probably kicked me a little harder a few more times, I would have had broken ribs. But again, I'm pretty big and strong, and so all of that kind of worked in my favor to a degree, I guess. If I'd been kind of like a skinny little guy, like, I would have been done for. And I mean, I'm just glad it was me going back to the cabin and not my wife. Like, that would have been pretty terrible. And so we ended up staying in South Africa for another 4 months, because we loved what we were doing. And it was kind of the sense of, we're not going to let them beat us. You know, they're not going to win. They're not going to scare us. That kind of thing. But eventually, like, enough incidents kind of happen that it's like we're not staying anymore. Like, we just, it feels like you're constantly under attack, constantly on alert, not sleeping at night. And like by this point, like, I'm traumatized and angry. Like, you know, I'm wanting to kill people, and like, legitimately. And a part of me realized, like, that, you know, I say that, and it's like there's a part of my brain that goes, "This isn't who you are. You're not a violent person." You know, but yet these thoughts kept entering my head as a result of suffering a violent trauma. And
did you get any help? Were you talking to anybody?
I did spend some time doing some trauma counseling. But it was, I would say, like, I have a lot of respect for qualified trauma counselors. It's a very, like, skilled profession. And it's definitely helpful in terms of at least helping me to make sense of what was happening in my head a little bit. So, because it's really hard to have all these thoughts of violence and retribution and wanting to set traps and use some of my military skills to, like, carry out, you know.
So you really went there. You were.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't just
I was like,
thought, you were planning.
And so that's when I knew, like, we have to get out of here. Because one way or another, it's like something bad is going to happen. And this, like I said, I knew, like, there's always a part of my brain that said, this isn't who you are. And so, and I'm suffering from PTSD at this point as well, right? Because you have repeated incidents, like people just breaking in, robbing us, that kind of stuff. Like, it just, the anger just keeps building up to the point where it's like, you know, we have to leave. And not sleeping at night, sleeping in shifts, like sleeping with weapons by our bed, you know, panic buttons to call private armed security who come and...
Yeah, that's not a normal life.
No, it's like living in prison. And so we ended up going back to Australia because, we needed to psychologically just decompress from life in South Africa. And, you know, depending on who you speak to, other South Africans will be like, yep, that's exactly how it is. And some who choose to stay there, in one sense, they're kind of like the frog with the water that's just getting turned up slowly, and they're kind of used to living like that. And in a sense, they do get to live with a standard they probably wouldn't have elsewhere, but it's with a constant edge to it. You know, at some point, a gang of armed guys might show up and rob you, rape you, murder you. Like, that's the reality of it that very rarely gets talked about outside of South Africa.
I know so many people that have emigrated from there to the UK, and you know, other places.
We have tons of South African doctors here. And here's the thing, in saying all of this, like, this isn't just like a black-white issue. Either figuratively, metaphorically, or literally. There's South Africa has many different ethnic groups in it. It's not just like one sort of homogenous group of people. There's 8 different ethnic black groups down there, and there's a lot of violence between them because there's a lot of cultural differences, and they don't like each other. So sometimes people misunderstand and think there's only sort of one sort of ethnic tension, and that's between sort of blacks and whites. I'm like, nope, they hate each other. And pretty badly.
And I think there's definitely something to be said for in that environment. It causes people to think and behave and react in ways that they would not otherwise do. You know, there was a lady, it was a long time ago, there was a South African lady that came on training with me, and I remember her saying, so she was a white South African lady, and she said that when she goes home and she's in South Africa, she is hands up racist. And when she is here in the UK, she works with Black people and is not and never would be racist towards them or even think that way. And it was as if she had a different psychology that kicked in when she was in South Africa to what she had when she was here in the UK. I think the conversation came up because we were talking about values, you know, our sort of beliefs and values and how it works in our mindset. And I think the question had been around, you know, can your values be context dependent? Can you change what you value based on the environment that you're in? And you know, certainly according to her experience, her values changed in South Africa to what they were when she was here in the UK.
Yeah. Well, some of it is, I would call it a survival mechanism.
Uh-huh.
And so it's because of the violence, like, it's not like the black people trust each other down there either.
Sure.
But if you're white, you're a minority and you're very visibly a target.
Yes. Yeah.
And especially as a white female,
Mm-hmm.
because the rape statistics are horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
1 in 2 women are raped, and 1 in 4 women are gang
Wow.
raped. Like,
Oh,
they call it jack rolling down there.
right.
And yeah, so people would be horrified if they hear, oh, this woman goes to South Africa and she's a racist, and they go, well, when black men in gangs have a term called jack rolling for gang raping white women, well, not just white women, but that's one of their big targets. You understand this is a primal protective response. You can't, how do you? It's a cultural thing down there, and it's not a good one. It's and so it's no wonder that this isn't to justify racism in any sense. I don't want that to be misunderstood. But I like to say that all behavior makes sense. And when you understand the context, that this is potentially a life and death thing for her, that's probably why this shift happens.
Yeah. And I guess the tricky thing as well in, taking what you've just said, that all behavior makes sense at some level for those guys that do the jack rolling, that makes sense to them too. There is something going on behind that, whether that's getting a need met, whether that is, like some kind of making claim,
Well, so in like a lot of the black African cultures, they have something that we don't really typically have, and that is a transition from boyhood to manhood. And very often it involves sexual activity,
right,
in one way or another. And so it's about power and strength and masculine dominance. It's not necessarily about sexual pleasure. It's about masculine dominance, and it's a cultural thing. And for us, it doesn't make sense. We haven't grown up with this context, and I'm not trying to excuse that behavior either. But that's one of the reasons that it exists, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I think having lived there and experienced what I did down there, like that was probably the most violent act directly against me, but it wasn't the only one that people were close to that seeing that, one of my best friends is Haitian. Like he's uncle to my kid. He was the best man at my wedding, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, but if I was to go back to South Africa and get approached by a group of black men, I'm going to feel pretty on edge.
Yeah.
Because of the experience that I had.
Would you have that same feeling if that happened in Canada?
No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, I ran a store in the city that I'm in, and I actually had a regular group of black guys that came in as customers.
Yeah.
We got along just fine. Because there was an African store right in the same sort of shopping strip mall that we had. And so they'd go over there, get some of their things, and they'd come into our store, and like there wasn't an issue at all. We got along just fine.
Yeah.
If they all came in kind of hoods up, I'd probably again feel a little bit more on edge.
Yeah. Might be a double take in there.
Yeah. So, but when they come in like laughing, joking, just having a good time, whatever, and they know who I am, we've done many transactions, that kind of thing. There's no issue there. So there is an element of context dependent. South Africa has a violent culture.
Yeah.
Like it or not, and very it seems like it probably it seems as though they try not to let so much of that leak out, like the level of violence that happens down there.
Yeah.
But I mean, Johannesburg is known as like the murder capital of the world.
Yeah.
Like it's an unfortunate, and it's so tragic because it's like the black people suffer too.
Yes.
The women, like in the program that we were working in, there was 60% female was the intake deliberately because they needed some extra help because culturally they were very often oppressed and seen as lower class citizens.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to, the organization I was working for was really trying to give them an edge up. And you'll hear from all of these women, like every one of them has either been raped or knows someone who's been raped. That's the reality that they live with down there. Not just like the white people, the black people as well.
Yeah.
They will all, like you ask anyone who knows someone or has had a family member murdered, they'll all put their hands up.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, it's a tragedy is what it is.
Yeah.
But like, you can't go down there and fix it. Like, there's nobody down there. Nobody can go into that culture and go, well, I'm going to fix you.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
The desire for change
sort of
has to come.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so they have to want that change themselves.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you think that, given what happened to you, did it change the way that you thought about Black people?
No. No. Not at all.
Was that easy for it to not do that? Well, or did you have to have a word with yourself at times?
I would say while I was in South Africa, I was definitely more leery of groups of Black people after that happened to me.
Yeah.
Black males. Black females, no issue.
Sure.
But Black males, if there's a group of them and I'm by myself, oh yeah, I'm on edge when I was living down there. But outside of that, no. Like, you go back anywhere else and it's like there's because there isn't the context like in Canada. Like,
sure.
You know, maybe if I was to go live in like Toronto, where they have a lot of sort of Caribbean immigrants, and I happen to be in an area, but you know, because there is Caribbean drug and gang violence that comes up that way. Sure, maybe.
So but it's not about the people; it's about the behavior.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that often gets missed when people want to make it about race, and I'm like, it isn't about race. It's about behavior and culture, and it's. At what point do we say, like, we need to identify that this behavior is not good?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And call out bad behavior for bad behavior and not make race a part of it.
Yeah.
Because on the other side of the coin, let's say, like, there's very corrupt politicians down there and very corrupt Black politicians who, through like rigged tenders and union jacking and things like that, where they line their own pockets. And then they sit there and point the finger and say, "Oh, it's the white people that have all the wealth."
Yeah.
And if anybody attempts to call them out on they're literally robbing their own people. You know, they'll just cry. They'll play the race card, and I go, "It's not about that. It's about your corrupt behavior. Why can't we call that out?" You know, so because their own people are living. You know, it was like ironic that in the Western Cape there was a political party led by a Jewish lady of all things.
Okay.
And the Western Cape was thriving economically because maybe she wasn't corrupt or her corruption was better concealed. I don't know. But normally the dominant political party there is known as the ANC, the African National Congress, which is known as the Black People's Party. In South Africa is 80% Black. And so it would be seen as like being a traitor if you voted for this other party because of her skin color. And yet, like, that it wasn't really a province, but whatever they call it, state, was more economically prosperous because there was less corruption going on. Yeah. And everyone's standard of living was better. But the ANC didn't like it because it made them look bad.
Right.
Because it shined a light on their corruption. So again, this becomes about like behavior and culture.
Yeah.
But they also have this idea that, like, if you have two watches and I steal one, it's not really stealing. Because you have two watches and I have none and I need one. Yeah. You know, never mind if you've worked for anything. Like,
that sounds like communism, no?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like you have to kind of live there to experience it. And for me, I'm like grateful for all of this experience. And people would look back and think, well, why would you be grateful for that? I'm like, because it took me on this like journey of growth. Like it definitely like took away a degree of naivety I had about the world when you stare into the faces of people who are smiling as they beat you. You definitely recognize, or I definitely, you know, all of a sudden I'm aware that, okay, like I knew this stuff happened, but now it happened to me personally, and I can't ignore the reality that there are bad people out there with bad intentions. Yeah. You know, and I'm not that special, you know. So,
did you need that lesson? I mean, you know, I sometimes get a lesson in life, and I'm a bit like, yeah, I didn't need that one, actually. I was fine without that lesson. Thank you.
Well, ultimately, I would say yes. I would say yes. And I would say I'm grateful for that experience, and I wouldn't take it out of my past. Despite all of the struggles that came along after that, all of the fallout from the PTSD, the food addiction, the binge eating, I wouldn't take any of that out of my past because, first of all, I had to learn what forgiveness actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for me to be set free from the trauma that I had experienced, like the first step was for me to actually forgive those men for what they did.
Right.
And they would do it. I'm convinced they'd do it again if they saw me.
Mm-hmm.
So you ask the question, well, how do you forgive men who would kill you if they could for what they did?
Well, I have another question, which is what specifically did you need to forgive them for? Because I feel like there is probably more than one thing.
That's a really good question. For trying to kill me, for having violent intent towards me, for judging me by the color of my skin, making assumptions about who I am and what my intentions were. So just like letting go of all the things, all of the resentment and the anger that I had towards them for what they did to me.
Yeah.
And it really started with asking, well, because I don't think people are born racist. Maybe we're born with a sense of like we're cautious around humans who look a little bit different than us. I think there's probably a primal part of that in us.
Yeah.
But I mean,
racial bias, perhaps.
Sure. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you know, or maybe I should put it, I don't think it's necessarily something we need to feel a sense of guilt over. I think it's kind of it's kind of wasteful to try to make somebody feel guilt for an inherent primal sort of characteristic that they didn't ask for.
Yeah.
To be like, you should feel guilty. You know, why? You were born with that intent in you. Now, with a degree of awareness, you can sort of elevate yourself above that. I mean, you look at kindergarten kids, like they run around and play with each other, like no problem. You know, when I was hanging out with my buddy and his kids, like they were playing with my son. You know, he's only 6 months old now. They had a blast playing with him. They're like 5 and 7, and they had a blast with him, like cuddling with him, and you know, they didn't see anything different.
Yeah.
Or if they did, they didn't show it at all. You know, so there's a part of us that you know doesn't really look at this thing. We're like, do you want to be my friend? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So
I feel like there must be an age though where you do start to spot the difference, because I remember in my primary school, so when I was very little, there were in the 80s in the UK, there were probably more so Indian, Pakistani immigrations that were taking place then. And so there were people of those ethnicities that I grew up with that were familiar to me. When I went to my secondary school, I think that was the first time that I saw a Black person my own age. Okay. And it stood out, you know, not for any particular reason other than, oh, I didn't have a Black person in my primary school. This is different. Right, but I think if they'd been there from the beginning, then something about being that much younger wouldn't have made it stand out in my mind quite so much.
Right, yeah. And where I grew up, it was more, we had a lot of Indian immigrants and Chinese, because Chinese. I grew up in British Columbia on the West Coast in Vancouver, and so there was a lot of that. And then, you know, in my teen years that were spent in a small town, but we have a lot of Indigenous people there. And so, and there were definitely like some ethnic tensions, but I mean, I remember growing up in Ravi and Manny were like a couple of friends of mine. Their mom made blueberry pancakes. You know, they lived up the road from us. Like, we didn't think anything about going to their place. They were just our friends, and their mom made great blueberry pancakes. Like that was kind of it. So, but you're right. I think, and when I traveled, and when I go to countries that I'm like a visible minority. Like people definitely look at me like I have two heads. So the other part of it is maybe this idea that it's a one-way street, that there's when I'm like, no. This happens all around the world in every culture and ethnicity. This is not uniquely linked to one skin color, one ethnicity. Definitely not. No. You know, it's a natural human, like, you know, in Cuba, we hopped on a workers bus and you know, paid like 10 cents or whatever. And to go somewhere else besides a tourist resort, which might have been a risky thing to do, but we did anyways. Yeah. And everyone looked at us like we had two heads. Like they were kind, they weren't unfriendly, but they're like, you don't belong here. Like, you're clearly on the wrong bus.
Yeah.
And we went to like these Cuban markets and stuff, and it was clear that we were different. I mean, a guy walked into a gate, staring at my wife, like he was rubbernecking so hard, staring at my wife that he walked.
Wow.
Bing. Yeah. And so, like, it's not exclusive to any one group. Travel in Asia, like, I stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
Because
it's funny you say about it as well, because one of my best friends is Indian, and I remember having a conversation with her. She'd actually come over to Bulgaria to stay with me for a few days, and she was saying, I can't stay in the sun too much because I'll get too tanned. And I was like, send it my way. And I was like, who doesn't want that? And she was like, no, it's a caste thing from India, it's better to be lighter skinned. And I was like, we so colonized you, and I apologize for that. Like, please tan yourself as much as you like.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a thing. I didn't even know it was a thing for them.
Yeah, and it would have been before the British ever showed up as well.
Yeah, possibly.
I mean, but I mean, in our cultures too, like if you had tanned skin versus pale skin was seen as very attractive because it meant you didn't work out in the sun. You weren't a manual laborer. You were right. So pale skin used to be prized.
Yeah.
And now it's ironic that tan skin means that you live. It's seen as attractive, and you live somewhere where you can afford
the good holidays.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of ironic how like trends shift, and I'm like as white as they come. Like I say, I'm truly Canadian. I come in two colors, red and white. So it's and so I wish that I tanned better, but I don't, and that's the reality. I only burn and then suffer. So
this is no fun.
Yeah. And so that kind of element of it is really fascinating in a sense.
Yeah.
Because I look at my friend Troy, and like he's about as dark as my shirt. Like he's dark.
Yeah.
And he's never worn sunscreen in his life. And I'm envious of that. Yeah. I'm so envious that he can just go out in the sun. Not have to wear a shirt if he doesn't want to, and not worry about it.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's, so, but, anyways, it's interesting how this develops culturally, but.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think we're so complicated given that we're just the one species.
Yeah. Yeah. Human beings are. And that's what makes life interesting, though.
Yeah.
Like if we were all robots, it'd be awfully boring. Yeah. And it's what leads us on these journeys of like discovery and self-actualization. And, there'll be some people probably listening to this conversation feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Being like, oh my gosh, I feel uncomfortable hearing about this. Well, why? Yeah. Why can't we talk about the human condition? Why can't we, and so on. I mean, I just think of like people feeling very, very uncomfortable talking about race and skin color and things like that when I'm like, it's a reality. Yeah. But I also think it's important for us to show compassion and understand why we're where we're at.
Yep.
Rather than just try and bury it in shame and guilt and go, well, this is how I got here. Like if I'd become sort of an angry racist because of what had happened to me, it's not to justify that behavior, but I would say that would be an understandable like thing.
Yeah.
Because I was violated multiple times by people of different ethnic groups, specifically targeted because of my skin color.
Yeah.
And so, like I got the work done in terms of therapy.
Yeah. Well, I think, what you say there about it would make sense that someone would develop that animosity.
Yeah.
That it makes sense in my mind for a period of time. I think there's a point at which that's not happening to you anymore. Now, like you did, you have to do the work to get yourself back to where you want to be.
Yeah. What do you think about those like soldiers who suffer from PTSD?
Yeah.
Like it's about like, it's hard when something traumatic happens. Like there's a book by Bess van der Kolk. What's it called? The Body Keeps Score. If you ever want to understand, if you haven't read it, or anyone listening, if you ever want to understand what's happening in someone's brain when they're traumatized, it's not an easy read. Or you can listen to an Audible or like an audiobook. It's not an easy book to get through, but you will see everything differently. when you understand what happens to a traumatized brain, and probably be a lot more compassionate.
Yeah.
And I tell people, look, compassion is not a get out of jail free card. I don't mean that. But I do believe that all behavior makes sense if we understand what's happened. It doesn't mean all behavior is good. Like,
No.
I'm not absolving the men of what they did to me. I'm not saying what they did was okay, but I'm saying it makes sense. I understand to a degree why that behavior occurred.
Yes.
Something happened in their life that led them to this place.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is, but at least that understanding helped me to cultivate a sense of compassion for them enough that I could forgive them for what they did, and I could start on my own journey of healing, which took a number of years, really.
So what was the time span between the event happening and you reaching a place of forgiveness and compassion?
Well, it happened in August, and it was probably March of the next year, where we were living with my brother in Turkey. And I just remember one night I just couldn't sleep. I think I was just exhausted from like not sleeping, and I was just so sick of reliving the event. And every time I thought about it, being triggered and feeling angry. And this happens with trauma. Traumatized people relive the event over and over again in their head, re-traumatizing themselves, saying, "If I knew this, I would have done this," and so on. And it was, it's an attempt to take back something. It's an attempt to rewrite a story that can't be rewritten. And so I just realized I have to, if I'm ever going to move forward with my life, I have to make peace with what happened to me. And forgiveness is not like I decided to forgive them and yay, la-di-da, it's all sunshine and rainbows, But I made the conscious decision that I want to forgive them. And so each time the incident came up and I felt the rage coming up in me, I tried to counter it with a sense of compassion. And say, okay, even compassion towards myself, because I felt guilty actually about the anger that I felt. I didn't want it there. Like that's one of the most, I think, tricky things with trauma. Like I didn't want these intrusive, angry, rage-filled, violent thoughts in my head. I didn't want them there. Like that's not fun. I didn't enjoy it one bit. And so I started to counter it with cultivating a sense of compassion towards myself and towards them as human beings.
What did that look like for you? Was there a specific thing that you would focus on in your mind? Was there something that you said to yourself, like an affirmation? Was it a feeling that you were sending out? How did you do that?
Breathing, definitely. Breathing was definitely a part of it. So just practicing like a breathing rhythm, and I kind of developed this visualization of like wrapping a thought in a bubble and floating it out of my head.
Okay.
Saying, I don't have to connect to this thought.
Yeah.
And it's I can't explain it better than that, really. But that's what I started to do, is I started to realize that I don't have to attach to this thought and follow it down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I don't have to feed this thought. I don't have to pour gasoline on the fire. And so instead, what I can do is I can accept that the thought is there. I didn't ask for it. It showed up, but I can also wrap it in a bubble and let it go away and let it go.
I freaking love that, Jon.
Yeah. So that was kind of my way of working through it. So I guess you could say breathing and visualization in a sense.
Yeah.
And then also wanting to feel a sense of compassion. And so I tried, in one sense, to picture the men who attacked me as victims in pain. Something had happened to them.
Yeah.
And the thought of I'm an empath, and so the thought of them being in pain and being hurt and leading to this place where they want to inflict hurt on other people helped me to cultivate compassion for them.
Okay.
Not to excuse what they did, but to say they're human beings, and hurt people hurt people. That's what they do.
Good.
Yeah. So that's how the process kind of started. But then there was kind of the next struggle, of course, because there always is.
Yes.
I developed binge eating disorder and food addiction because I wasn't really equipped to deal with my own self and the changes that had happened in my body. So part of my dealing with the trauma was to eat food to change the channel in my head.
Okay.
And so well, one step of the healing was to forgive them so that the incident being relived would no longer enrage me and, fill me with violent thoughts. Now I had to deal with this. I'd gained like over 100 pounds. And all of a sudden, I'm not this athletic guy anymore. I'm obese.
So
And
had you been using food as a way to distract yourself from the unwanted thoughts?
Oh, very much. Yeah. Yep. It was a cheap and easy escape. So I had enough, what would I say, I had enough sense about me to not turn to drugs and alcohol. Many people turn to either or both as a way of, I call it changing the channel in their head, creating a sense of escape. But the problem with food is we face it every day. It's omnipresent.
Yeah.
And it's offered to us, it's sold to us, it's marketed to us, it's how we humans connect.
Yeah.
But I started to feel, so I felt very ashamed of who I had become. I felt this deep sense of shame. How did I go from being athletic to being obese? And it seemed to happen really quickly. And in trauma, it can happen really quickly. Like I'm talking, it happened over a span of like 6 months.
Sure.
But like, because there's a lot of dissociation that occurs when feeling traumatized, like trying to disconnect from my body, and trying to just eat to make the feelings go away, eat until I'm full, until the only thing I can feel is fullness.
Okay.
And the physical sensation of fullness in my stomach was so uncomfortable that I couldn't think about anything else.
Yeah.
It's quite fascinating to, I guess, even think about what was going on in my head at the time.
Yeah.
Like I look back now, and as I'm sort of retelling this and go, wow, like I don't recognize that person that I'm describing. You know, that's the crazy thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating. So you were eating to distract yourself. You were eating to almost to sort of give yourself a different pain to focus on other than the emotional one that was there. Some people say that they get comfort from food, that they get almost a sort of warmth from food in some way. Did that happen for you too?
Yeah, like there's a sense of, I don't know how to describe it really, but pizza was a trigger food for me.
Okay.
Pizza is like the perfect comfort food.
Right.
It combines like so many pleasure. It's like the best selling food in the world.
Yeah.
Like, I think in our city we probably have like 50 pizza joints, and we're a city of maybe 100,000 people. So that's like a pizza joint for every, if it's, for every 500 people or something like that.
Yeah.
I haven't done, but it's filling.
Yeah.
It's satisfying. There's so many different elements to it. There you can get some sweetness, some savory, the fluffy, like the texture of the dough would bring me back to childhood and my mom baking bread and things like that, So I would eat a lot of it. And it's relatively cheap. But I also recognize that this was like, it's also extremely calorie dense. And
did you know that it was happening whilst it was happening, but you were kind of just, okay, we're just going to brush that under the carpet, we'll worry about that problem later? Or was there just a day when you went, actually, what has happened to me?
I was kind of aware, like, that the binge eating wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
In fact, not kind of aware. I was aware, very aware that it wasn't helpful, but it was the only tool I had in that moment, really, in one sense. Like, the trauma counseling had helped me to understand what was happening in my head. But it didn't make it go away necessarily. It just helped me to, at least come to a place where I'm like, okay, what's happening in my head makes sense. Because trauma counseling is also expensive, and I could only afford like so much at the time.
Yeah. So you were informed, but you didn't have all the strategies yet. You made up some great strategies of your own that I'm going to steal and pretend are mine. But you needed more.
Yeah. And so then I felt shame around my behavior. I felt ashamed of my body and what it had become. I felt ashamed when people would look at me, knowing what I used to be like. When my wife first met me, I had an 8-pack. Like I was in pretty good shape, and she found me very attractive. Now, to her credit, my wife has never stopped loving me. I will say, in all of like my hopelessness, my pain, my despair, my frustration. There's many times in all of my pain, I just told her to go back to Australia. Said, just you'll be happier without me in your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's how bad it got.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't give up on me. No matter how hard I tried to push her away, she's like, no, I know who you are, and I'm not giving up. And so I'm fiercely loyal to her because of this, because in my darkest days, she refused to leave my side, and so it's so it was a struggle, and I got into the world of like this murky world of like diet culture and weight loss and quick fixes and sometimes illicit substances that I probably won't name, in attempts to like force my body to do things that it wasn't wanting to do. Okay. So I was trying to essentially punish and force my body into submission.
Yeah.
And when it wasn't working, the response was to push harder and work harder. Mm-hmm. Like, so go to the gym for longer. Like, I was strong. I was into powerlifting at this point. Yeah. But my powerlifting couldn't undo my eating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you were conscious that you wanted to change your body, but in terms of what was going in, that hadn't changed.
No. Because there's a part of it, like, it doesn't come from the logical part of our brain. Mm. And so, our prefrontal cortex, this part of our brain, we can logically go, this behavior doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And we might even use language like, I shouldn't do this, or I know I shouldn't do this, or that's true. But it's coming from a much more powerful and primal part of our brain that's like, I don't care what you say. Yeah. And so even that leads to a feeling of shame and helplessness and guilt. Why can't I control this behavior?
Yeah.
But ultimately it's because I wasn't addressing what was really going on, what the role was that the food was playing in my life. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to do everything except like address that. And I didn't really kind of realize it. Mm. I got deeply into nutrition science and supplement science. I have a chemistry background. I got involved in, formulations for, consulting for formulation for supplement companies. We looked at, setting up manufacturing facilities. Like I was diving deep into the world of supplement science.
Okay.
Because I was like, I'm going to find an answer to my inability to lose weight.
Yeah.
And I'd even tried hiring a few coaches, and it was a really frustrating experience because I hired them, because it looked like they knew what they're talking about because they had a physique that I thought was enviable. Mm-hmm. And it turns out they had no idea what I was going through.
Yeah.
They had no idea what my struggles were. Mm. And so they'd just be like, well, why aren't you doing this? You know what to do. And I'd be like, you don't get it. Like I would get angry at them. I wouldn't get angry in person with them, but secretly I'd just be so angry at them because I'm like, you don't get it. You do not know what's happening in my life right now. You do not know my struggles. And it's true. If someone's never struggled with their weight, like it's really hard to understand what it's like. And I think this is why I work really well with people in the weight loss realm, because I know so deeply and intimately like the burning shame, the guilt, the struggle, the pain, the anguish, the desire to change, and the feelings of helplessness, and like I know all of that because it's been my lived experience.
So as a percentage, knowing what you know now, how much of someone's desire to lose weight or inability to get themselves on the right track with it, how much of that is a mental problem?
90%.
Holy Moses, that's a lot.
So, like, I focus on what I call brain-driven weight loss when I work with people because of this. So, and the other thing to recognize is this is not an information problem. Mm-hmm. I'm highly educated, and we live in the age of Google.
Yeah.
I'm quite intelligent, and I don't say that to toot my own horn. I got my brain free of charge. I can't take the credit. Yeah. But I'm like, I'm really intelligent. I have a great brain, highly educated, and knowledge couldn't fix it. Google couldn't fix it.
Yeah.
And, so in the introduction, I mentioned there was a question that changed my life.
Yes.
And so we're kind of getting to that point in my story where I finally hired another coach because I was, I got so frustrated with hiring coaches and they sucked. Sorry. That's how I felt about them. Yeah. And really, it's not their fault in a sense because they'd always just been in shape and they posted pictures of them looking good on Instagram. And I was like, I want to look like you because I think happiness resides there, which, spoiler alert, it doesn't. And so I hired this coach, and it was different. So he didn't he didn't treat me the way I treated myself, because there's a lot of projection going on in all of this as well, right? Like I would project how I felt about myself and assume that's how other people saw me.
Right.
Everybody else must know that I'm a fat loser, that I'm such a hopeless like sack of garbage because I can't seem to get my head out of my get out of my own head. I know all this stuff and I can't do anything about it. Like so, I had all this, and he didn't treat me like that. He was really patient and compassionate and understanding, and he didn't when I didn't get the results that he didn't get mad at me. He didn't shame me. He didn't guilt me or coerce me. He just said, let's keep going. Let's just take another step here.
Yeah.
And so a couple months into working with him, he pulled out this question, and he said, all right, Jonathan, we're going to go a little deeper here. And he said, if you make a list of all the things you love and value, how far down that list do I have to go before I find your name?
Nice question.
Yeah. And that one stopped me cold.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't that I was near the bottom of the list. It was I wasn't even on the list.
Wow.
So in all of my frustration, my shame, my despair, like it had never occurred to me that I was allowed to be on this list of things that I love and value. And so that really was this huge paradigm shift for me. And I haven't cried very many times in my life, not because I'm afraid of crying, but I think I remember crying at my wedding when I tried to say my vows. But yeah, I think I cried, and I don't know if it was tears of like sort of frustration, grief, mourning, just this realization that for so long I'd basically been abusing my body and abusing myself, trying to, and I'm sorry if that's triggering language for people, but like, yeah, I've been abusing myself and my body in frustration, trying to get it to change. And realizing that it was so like short-sighted and narrow-minded and blind, really, and I was suffering more than I needed to. So then we have to start on this journey of, well, how do I learn to love myself, even as I presently am?
Yeah.
Like that was, so that's one thing to realize. Okay, I should be on this list.
Yeah.
Well, how do I get on the list? Let alone get somewhere near the top? Because now this means confronting my sense of identity, the beliefs that drive my behavior, the person that I've seen myself to be for so long. I was probably the epitome of the person who would set themselves on fire to keep other people warm.
Yeah.
And starting to cope with the guilt that I felt for taking care of myself. And so there's another little confounding factor that sort of slipped in under the radar. So I got asked this question in 2017, so a few years back. Around that time, I'd also been suffering from serious anxiety episodes and panic attacks.
Okay.
Because I'd been pushing so hard, trying to get my body to lose weight.
Right.
I had been burning my nervous system out with stimulants that I shouldn't have been using, sleeping less than 5 hours a night because when you're jacked on stimulants, you can't sleep, trying to power lift 2 hours a day, trying to run a business 14 hours a day. I also, to just add to it, happened to be in a business relationship that was very toxic as well.
Okay.
Yeah. And so all of this came to a head. And so really the panic attacks and the anxiety were, I call it like my nervous system pulling the fire alarm. And saying, you can't keep doing this. I remember my doctor saying to me, like, we tried a couple medications, and I was like, I can't do it because they make me feel like a zombie for 12 hours, and I can't function.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, there's no pill that can help you. You have to change how you're living.
Yeah.
And so I had to stop going to the gym because even just anything that would get my heart rate up could trigger a panic attack. I had to just cut out all stimulants and go cold turkey and feel like a zombie while my body was basically... I don't like the word, but detoxing from all the stimulant abuse that I'd had. And then I had to deal with like the deep depression that came along with it as well. Never suicidal, but very dark.
Yeah.
I would describe it as like this black cloud would kind of come over my head, and I'd feel extremely like heavy hearted and hopeless and despairing. And like I would shut my eyes and be staring into blackness. And it's a really, again, like the anxiety was one thing. It was very disconcerting because it would feel like I was floating out of my body, like there was this dissociation happening, and that was really, really disconcerting. But then after redlining the nervous system, then it falls into this very depressed state of sort of hopelessness and despair. And that was a really dark place to be as well. And I don't know where I'd be without my wife again, because she really stood by my side in all of this, as I was trying to find my way out of this. So all of this is like happening all at the same time.
Wow.
And yeah, it was actually quite a mess.
It's overwhelming, isn't it?
It really was. I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I manage to do this? But the one thing I'll say is I didn't do it alone.
No.
And I think that's so important for people to understand.
Yeah.
I had a coach who was very compassionate, very caring, gave me the space. He was an anchor to me. I had my wife who, she was an anchor to me. She learned how to just kind of breathe with me through my anxiety episodes. I learned how to communicate with her when my stress levels were going up, and I could feel like if I keep going this direction, I'm going to have an episode. Yeah. She learned how to kind of back off, and it really like strengthened our relationship even more. Like it took it to a much deeper level, because she worked alongside me through all of this. Learning how do you learn to live with someone with all of this, and so because of these shifts that I made, like I can say now that I think I've had like one minor episode this year with anxiety. I had maybe 2 last year and 2 in 2019. And so like it's almost non-existent in my life now. It's always kind of like, I know that if I go down the path of not taking care of myself, that wiring is there.
Yes.
But I know how to manage my lifestyle in such a way that it's not coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that part of this process was you having to learn to love yourself. Before the trauma happened. Had you loved yourself then? And if you had, did you know it?
I don't think I did. So I probably had like a sort of a pseudo confidence. I think my sense of identity was wrapped in my athleticism and fitness.
Okay.
And losing that meant I lost the thing that, like, I thought, yeah, basically the thing that I thought made me desirable or attractive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in obesity, I kind of took on the identity of the jolly fat guy to try and, pretend that I enjoyed being obese, that I liked eating as much as I did. I had this gargantuan appetite to try and justify it, So I had to learn to love myself. I had to love myself as I presently was. So that meant letting go of this idea that I'm an athlete, trapped in this body.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm just a human being, and this is exactly as I am. I had to be able to look at like my obesity, my fat rolls, like, sorry for the visual in a sense, but it's like I had to be able to look at all of that and go, I still love the person.
Yes.
And I think there was also this fear that if I started treating myself with compassion, that somehow I wouldn't change. It was like I had this idea that I had to punish my way into, and I acted that behavior out so many times. I had to punish my way into change, and this fear that if I treated myself with compassion and kindness, that I wouldn't be able to change.
Yeah,
and
you let yourself off the hook, and
like beating myself up was kind of like paying the price for my crimes.
Well, maybe that's because you decided to join the military, Jonathan.
Yeah, there is. It's interesting.
You got used to that sort of discipline.
Yeah, there is an element of service before self, right? They drill that into you, and it was probably already pre-existing. I mean, we could trace it all the way back to my birth and being sort of separated from my mom at birth for the first couple of months of my life. Like, she did the best she could, but she also had a 1-year-old. So credit to her and credit to my dad. My dad was trying to run a business. Like they did the best they could. This, and I love them dearly for it. They're amazing parents. I love them. But we could probably like trace it back to even that, right? Yeah. And so the military kind of exacerbated maybe what was already a pre-existing kind of condition, and then the trauma really and the fallout from that really just cracked it wide open and laid it bare, essentially.
Yeah. Was there something around having to separate who you are as yourself from who your physical self is in order to be able to love yourself when you were not as you wanted to be yet?
Interesting. I would say no. Um, I wanted to understand and come to this place where I said I've done the best I can with what I have.
Okay.
I did the best I could with the tools I had, and this is where it's got me.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, my body is kind of following the instructions I've given it in a sense.
Okay. Yep.
And so this I say that we have a famine biology, but we live in a feast world.
Mm.
And you know, the thing that was frustrating me so much is like the biological mechanism that means human beings have been alive on this planet for as long as, you know, they've been here. Yeah. The ability to store fat and survive famines.
Yep.
Without that, we would have died off a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like kind of maybe a funny twist of logic, but it was like my body actually did what it thought it needed to do to keep me alive.
Yeah. Yeah. It was doing the best job with the resources that you gave it.
Yeah. So it didn't mean that I loved being that. I mean, truthfully, there's actually some things that I miss about being over 300 pounds, primarily just eating like a reckless toddler whenever I want, whatever I felt like. There is a degree of pleasure to be found in that. Yeah. I will say that. But most of that was, you know, everything else was misery. Trying to sleep. Yeah. Like trying to wipe my butt, trying to cut my toenails, like trying to tie my shoes. Yeah. Just functioning on day-to-day life was harder. Yeah. It was, you know, and so it's so interesting because I think about the whole, I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole, but really the body positivity and health at every size kind of movement. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really infantilized obesity. Mm. I haven't met very many body positive obese people in their 40s. Yeah. Because it's actually you're metabolically damaged when you're obese, and there's a lot of inflammation. You're high risk for a lot of medical conditions. Yeah. I think maybe when you're an angry, reckless 20-year-old, you can be like, I can eat whatever I want, and I love myself, and so on and so forth. But it's like, I haven't met any metabolically healthy obese people in their 40s. Mm.
Yeah, I guess it gets dangerous.
It does.
And I have obese people in my family, and it just seems like life is harder.
It is
for them
in every sense of the word. And I think these movements were kind of like the pendulum swinging, because there's elements of so-called diet culture and body shaming and things like that are not good. Like creating judgment around people because of their size. Yep. You know, there's good human beings that carry around extra weight. It's a symptom. Yep. My obesity was a symptom. Mm. It was a symptom of a brain that was struggling.
Do you think you were addicted to food? Would you classify yourself as an addict?
Yes. Yeah. And the hardest part about like kind of breaking free from that is the fact that we're presented with food every day. So imagine like a cocaine addict being offered cocaine 3 times a day.
Yeah, it's funny you say about that, because part of the work that I do, so I'm also a hypnotherapist. And so sometimes I have people who come to see me because they want to work on their mindset towards losing weight. Sometimes I have people that come to see me because they want to give up smoking. And I would hands down sooner work with the people that want to stop smoking, because I can tell them such horrible things about cigarettes and make it so that they will never want to smoke again. But when I'm working with people around food, I have to be so careful because I still need them to eat.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a crucial shift there. And there's something to be said for, because we live in a culture where like food is never just fuel, right? Mm-hmm. It's family, it's connection, it's celebration, it's so many culture, history, and there are so many other good aspects of food that bring human beings together that are positive. But I had to get to the place where I could openly say to people, like, because there's food pushers, we show food with love, eat more food, we show hospitality with food. Yeah. And I would just have to say to people and be open and say, look, I'm like a recovered food addict. Yeah. And it's not healthy for me to go down this path. And so I really appreciate the sentiment that you're trying to express by sharing this with me, but I have to decline for the sake of my health. Mm-hmm. I try to say it as graciously as possible to not make them feel guilty. Because you look at, like, I mean, some people, it's not that they had trauma, it's just that, you know, they were showing love with food because, you know, maybe their grandparents or great grandparents lived through the Depression.
Yeah.
That's the pattern they developed.
Eat everything on the plate.
Yeah. Starving children in Africa, things like
that. You know? Yeah. Heard all that.
Yeah. You don't honor, like, poor people by eating more food. How on earth is that? You know, it's kind of like honoring poor people by hoarding more money.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's I just put it as a little side note in there because some people who feel guilty about, like, throwing away food, and I'm like, well, we produce such an abundance and excess of food that it's almost unavoidable. Food waste is unavoidable because we have so much of it.
Yeah.
We've done it in that sense.
Yeah. So what was the transition like for you once you'd had that moment of realizing, okay, there's something in my psychology here that needs to shift, as well as making the nutritional changes that I'm sure came along with that as well?
Yep.
Was it plain sailing?
No.
Damn it.
I know, right? But I would say, and for those who are struggling, I would say, look, maybe I'll give an example. The average smoker relapses 6 times when they try to quit. I would expect that for food addicts, it's going to be higher. Because food has so much more social and cultural acceptance and even necessity.
Yeah.
If it takes a smoker, because smoking right now is no longer seen as a positive attribute, or you know, you're not seen as tough or manly or cultured. You're just seen as
disgusting now.
Right, nowadays it's seen as a disgusting habit.
Yeah.
But and it's so interesting because remember, smoking solves a problem.
Yeah.
It's not a great long-term solution.
No.
But when we are running in our primal brain, this is urgent. I just need this today. I'll quit tomorrow. Yeah. Like, smoking solves a problem.
Yeah.
So, but I say that if the average smoker, it takes them 6 times before they quit successfully, the average food addict is probably going to take twice that. And so there's going to be relapses. But I say compassionate awareness is the most powerful step to change. And I deliberately use the word compassionate.
Yeah.
Because we have to become aware. I had to become aware of who I am in that moment and my behaviors in that moment, because many of our behaviors don't come from our conscious awareness. They come from our subconscious. They come from our habitual behaviors. They come from our psychology, our beliefs, our mindset, our sense of identity. And so we have to bring these behaviors into the light, into our conscious awareness, and be able to look at them with compassion rather than judgment, and then say, okay, it's like if somebody comes to me and is like slugging a bottle of wine because they've had a hard day. I don't say to them, well, you might as well finish off the bottle of wine. Like, that's helping them become an alcoholic. Yeah. But it's like, hey, I understand why you're drinking the wine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But let's reconnect to why we want this, why we're doing this. Let's understand what the wine is doing for you, what problem it's solving for you, and so on. So we can start to find alternate solutions, alternate ways of dealing with this. Sometimes, like, there were some things I just had to ask my wife not to bring into the house. And again, people who are in anti-diet culture, because I don't, like, I'm against dieting because I say you can't get permanent results from a temporary effort. Yeah. So in my program, Lifestyle 180, we work on reverse engineering a healthy lifestyle that you can use to create permanent change. But in the same token, it's like, don't run on a sprained ankle. Yeah. If an area of your mind is injured, don't try and stress it further. Yeah. Like, so for me, pizza and peanut butter were, particularly Kraft peanut butter, the green lid, was a real trigger food for me. And I could make like 6-layer sandwiches with like peanut butter and bread and smush it all together. And just, And so I just asked my wife to stop bringing it into the house for a period of time.
So there's practical things people can do, right? Just to make life a bit easier.
Yeah, it's like, don't run on a sprained ankle. Yeah. It's okay to say, hey, you know what? Like, I need to heal this part of my brain before I start trying to face that again. Yeah. I'm not superhuman, I do better with firm boundaries. My wife is more of a moderator. I'm more of an abstainer. And so even recognizing that, and it's not a bad thing. And so, for example, I just say I don't eat after 8 p.m. It's not because carbs suddenly turn evil. It's because I make bad choices.
Yeah.
I tend to be, by that point in time, my brain's tired. I tend to make more emotional-based decisions, comfort-based decisions. I'm not going to be choosing healthy food. And there's not really a need for it at that point in time. I'm going to sleep soon.
Yeah.
And so that, sticking to that rule has been really helpful. Just saying I don't eat after 8 p.m.
Yeah.
But it's for each person. You want to find something that works for you and that works with your kind of unique physiology, your mindset, and so on. So, like when I work with somebody, it's important to understand that I'm not telling them what to do. They're not following my rules because that's very disempowering, right? They're going to have an active role in shaping their own lifestyle.
Right.
I'm going to guide them.
Yeah.
And I'm going to support them. I'm going to help them work through the triggers and the struggles. But they must have an active hand in this because at the end of the day, if all people wanted was for me to hand them a meal plan and tell them what to do, they're going to turn around in less than 4 weeks and say, this didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And so it's for anybody that's like working through something like this, it's important to understand that you have to have an active role in this. And so as a coach, what I do is I create the space to, I call it wrestle with your demons in the light. In other words, I will not use your struggles as ammunition against you.
Yeah. So what if someone were to hear this podcast, reach out to you and say, I need some help? What can they expect to have happen?
Well, they can reach out to me and we can just have a conversation.
Yeah.
The first thing I want to find out is, am I the right person to help you?
Okay.
Because so sometimes there's this idea that like everybody who needs help, like, or maybe that coaches will like work with just anybody.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, no, I have a particular tool set and skill set, and so I want to find out if I'm the right match for you.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not, there's no point in trying to make it work. Or I want to find out if you're in the place where you want to change. Because there's 6 or 7 stages to change from like pre-contemplation to actually taking action.
Yeah.
So I want to know kind of where you're at. There isn't really a point in starting if I know 2 weeks down the road you're going to quit.
Yeah.
Because I put a lot of time and effort into working with each person, and I don't want to put a lot of effort in only to be sort of dumped 2 weeks later. And so, and I don't say that negatively at all. I'm always happy to have a conversation with somebody, but the point of it is really to get to know them, to get to know, am I the right person? What are they struggling with? Can I genuinely help them?
Yeah.
So that's really the first stage. From there, we'll like, if I can help them, and a lot of people I can. I've helped a lot of people. We'll start to build out a little bit of a roadmap, and but I'm also going to educate and empower somebody. So I'm not going to pretend that I possess all this secret knowledge. I'm going to share everything I know in a measured, paced fashion so I don't overwhelm somebody.
Yeah.
But I'm going to empower them and then give them opportunity to take that and put it into action and then use and shape it to suit their lifestyle. Yeah. And I think, again, that's them taking an active hand in their transformation.
Yeah. Yeah, which is super important. So do you feel that for you personally, are you now where you want to be?
Yes and no. Because there's always, I think there's always a sense of wanting to grow.
Uh-huh.
And it's a really cool part about being human.
Yeah.
So I'm at peace with where I'm at.
Yeah.
Yes. But there's more I want to do. And so it's funny because I'm kind of doing my own little, what I call a resilience challenge.
Right.
I haven't really talked much publicly about this. But
do it.
It's kind of me testing myself a little bit. So it's me testing my resilience to discomfort.
Okay.
So I get up in the morning. I mean, the first thing I do is I get out of bed. I've got a warm bed with a beautiful wife beside me that I just want to snuggle, right? And I got a baby son that I want to snuggle. But I get out of bed. I go downstairs. I got a stationary recumbent bike, and I hop on that, and I warm up, and then I go for a pretty intense ride on the bike.
Okay.
Make my lungs burn, make my heart rate, go up, breathe heavy, get kind of sweaty.
Yeah.
Have my brain tell me, why are you doing this first thing in the morning, that kind of thing. So really it's kind of testing that sort of physical resilience. Okay, so where am I at with that? And does it trigger anything? And when it does, while I'm riding, I'm kind of teaching myself to move into a bit of a meditative state where I not ignore, but I don't let sort of the discomfort I feel like seeing my legs and lungs stop me from continuing to work on my conditioning, because I've got a young son and he's just learning to crawl.
He needs a fit daddy.
Yeah, his legs do not stop moving. From the time he was he did like 120 kicks an hour in the room. My poor wife, like she hardly got any sleep because he just wouldn't stop moving. And it's the same now that he's out and he's like 6 months old.
Yeah.
His legs just go and go and go. Like in his sleep, he's like thumping away in his bassinet. So I'm like, I gotta work on my conditioning because this kid's gonna be a runner. After my ride, I then have a 10-minute cold shower. So I just turn it straight cold as it can go. Take a deep breath and step in. And it's funny because people think I'm nuts, but I'm like, you kind of get used to it a little bit.
Yeah.
Like it's never that it's comfortable, but I mean, I've been doing this for a while now, and I kind of 10 minutes goes by faster than you think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the same as an ice bath. I understand that. I don't have a bathtub big enough to fit me that can have an ice bath in. So it's kind of the next best thing. But it's really, again, about being able to tolerate discomfort, being able to have a little bit of distress and not freak out, be able to be calm in the face of that. So really sort of testing my resilience. I will fast for 24 hours at least once a week. Okay. So this is now me confronting my hunger and being aware of it and not treating it like it's an emergency, because in the past I would treat any sort of feeling of discomfort as a reason to eat.
Right.
And so it's not to necessarily ignore my hunger, but it's actually to sit with it and be present with it and recognize it that it's not an emergency. I've also basically eliminated sugar from my diet.
Okay.
Not because I think sugar is the most evil thing on the planet. I think overconsumption is pretty terrible metabolically speaking. But I want to see if there's any lingering triggers. Yeah. So are there times where I get cravings? And if I do, how do I deal with it when I've kind of put this firm boundary in place that says, like, I'm not eating sugar for, I don't know, until when? Now, that being said, like, I'm not saying I don't eat fruit. But any sort of added sugar, basically, I've eliminated that. It's not to say I'm going to eat like this for the rest of my life, but all of this is kind of like a little mini stress test for me. Where am I at compared to where I used to be? How do I tolerate discomfort? Where is my resilience at? And where can I learn and grow from it? So it's kind of like I just kind of have this hunger to grow and develop. So I'm not trying to be Wim Hof or something like that, but I think in order to grow, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable, because it's cliche, but like growth happens outside our comfort zone. And so if I'm willing to be uncomfortable, I'm more likely to experience growth. Yeah. And I will say I'm able to do this now because of the headspace I'm in. Yeah. I tried to do this a couple of years ago and I couldn't do it. Not because I was weak, but because I was not mentally in the right space. There was more work that needed to be done. Yeah. And so again, for people listening who think like I should, it's like, make sure you like heal your brain, heal your mind before you try something like this. So this is actually maybe an indicator of how healthy my mind is. Yeah. Now that I can do this, it's not triggering me. It's not triggering binges. It's not triggering restrictor behavior. I'm just actually doing it, and I'm actually enjoying it. My wife's watching me enjoy this. Again, she thinks I'm a bit nuts because of the cold showers, but there is, I don't know, like after like a minute and a half, you kind of just get used to it. And it's like, I think maybe it's the breathing thing. So meditation really became an important part of me managing my anxiety. So now the ability to kind of meditate while in a cold shower, and of course we're moving into our fall and gradually our winter, so the water should get a little bit colder because it's sourced from a river. But there's the ability to tolerate discomfort and maybe even deliberately do it, because it's like, I don't know, if I'm not willing to be uncomfortable like by myself, am I ever going to be willing to experience discomfort anywhere else in my life?
Yeah, good question. So looking back on all of those experiences that you've had, what are you now most proud of?
I would say that I still have a really awesome marriage.
Yeah, that's a very, very good achievement.
Yeah. But I can't, but I say that, I'm like, I can't actually take all the credit.
That's true.
Because people maybe would like to say maybe it's the weight loss, but I mean, again, the weight loss is really just a symptom of kind of the growth. But I look at the things that I value most in my life, and outside of myself, it's my wife and my son. The thing that we didn't have time to touch on, we don't need to, but like I lost all my life savings in a business failure as well. Oh, that happened in 2018. Like, wow. So I had that as well, and I had to walk away from that. And so, I mean, I've rebuilt this nutrition coaching business from the ground up, not from the ground up, from like a deep hole, actually.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot of rebuilding. You rebuilt yourself as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wouldn't take any of these experiences out of my life.
Mm.
I'm coming up to 40, and so maybe that's a really introspective time in life.
Yeah.
All of these experiences have shaped me to be who I am and who I am becoming.
Mm-hmm.
I think before we started recording, we talked a little bit about potential.
Yeah.
And I think there was maybe an element of me that ran from my potential for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm quite unique in my abilities and my ability to help people.
Yeah.
You won't meet very many people like me. And I'm not saying that to be arrogant, but I'm saying these are the abilities that I possess. That for so long I was either ashamed of. I was ashamed of being smart because it made people reject me.
Yeah.
I was ashamed of being ambitious because again it made people reject me. I felt like I was supposed to hide in the shadows most of my life instead of pursue what I'm really good at.
Yeah.
But I don't say this to say that I'm better than anybody else. I think all of us have innate gifts and abilities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I work with someone, I say nutrition is the cover story. I love uncovering people's stories and their innate gifts and abilities because we use food to fill a place in our life where it's not being filled with growth.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a better way to put that, but every one of us has this kind of awareness that we can do and be better.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not to make anybody feel guilty for not living up to their potential, but it's to say, like, if you have that awareness, like, you're not alone.
Yeah.
So I say I have these gifts, but I mean, I think you have gifts too. Everybody I meet has them. And it's like, if we can unlock these gifts, if we can share them with the world, like, imagine what would happen if I mean, I know this is never going to happen simultaneously, but if everyone, like, even just listening to this, made it their ambition to help one person, like, live a better life.
Yeah.
Like, imagine the magnitude of change that would occur.
Definitely. The ripple effect would be quite tremendous.
Yeah.
So on that note, if people feel that they want to explore the potential for reshaping their bodies and their relationship with food, what is the best way for them to reach out to you?
You could probably just send me an email, coachjohn@freedomnutritioncoach.com. Say, hey, I heard you on, well, we can put this in the show notes. I heard you on Gemma's podcast, and your story touched me or whatever, and I would love to talk more. The important thing is, like, people, I think, hesitate to reach out because they're worried that they're going to get, like, the hard sell or the pitch, or, like, the whole online coaching industry, like in the guru sphere and all this kind of stuff, I think is, like, giving people a bad taste in their mouth. And it's like, this isn't a sales pitch at all. This is a conversation.
Yeah.
If I'm the right person to work with you, then we'll talk about what that looks like.
Yeah.
But I think it starts, and then, if someone says, hey, I want to reach out, cool, I'll send you a link to book a call with me. And then we're just going to talk like two human beings.
Yeah.
We don't need to make it more than it seems to be in our heads. Like, we're going to have a conversation, and if I can help you, then I'm going to offer to help you. Like, it's that simple.
Marvelous. And speaking of it just being a conversation, how have you found the experience of talking to me today?
This has been a fascinating conversation because, one, you ask really, really good questions.
Thank you.
That you've drawn out really good information. I think I've probably shared things here that I haven't shared anywhere else, simply because nobody's asked the question. I think the timing of it is really good because I'm in a very good headspace to, I'm pretty open sharing, like, everything I went through. So I think it was, this has been one of the most intriguing conversations I've ever been a part of.
Marvelous. That's a really lovely feedback. It's been fascinating to speak to you today. And I can't imagine that there isn't anyone who hasn't had at least one thing that they can take away from this, whether that's an actionable step or just a different way of thinking about things, or some new perspective that they will have gleaned from this. So I'm really excited to hear people's feedback about what they got from the conversation that we've had today. Thank you so much for being here and talking to me.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to when we converse on my podcast, Wellness Unplugged, where I get to be the one asking the questions and then unpacking your story.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And I mean, if anybody wants to look it up, it's freedomnutrition.rocks/wellnessunplugged.
Marvelous.
So, yeah.
I will see you there. Thank you for talking to me today.
You bet. It's been a pleasure.
All right. What did you think? Did you love him? Because I loved him. I thought he was so open, so vulnerable, and really concise in everything that he shared. there were 3 things that I mentioned to you before the podcast that I said you should definitely be listening out for. Let me revisit those. So one of them was with regards to Jon's attitude towards food. Did you spot the point at which he said that his habit was to eat like a reckless toddler? Which I just thought was the most beautiful description, like stuffing it down like a reckless toddler. Now, here's what was important about that. If you go back and you listen again, and I encourage you to, because I think this is one of those shows that you can listen to more than once, you're going to get something different from it the second time around. You will notice that his volume, his voice gets louder when he talks about eating like a reckless toddler. There is clearly still desire and excitement in his relationship towards food. And with that being said, the other couple of things that I flagged up around Jon's addiction that I thought were really interesting was he is still an addict, and he is still putting in the work every single day. And I think that there is something very pure and honest, and I feel that that's really coming from a place of self-respect. He is not letting himself off the hook. He is being firm but fair with himself, and he is treating this in the same way that someone who attends Alcoholics Anonymous might need to run their life, in that they will always think of themselves as an addict, and every day they're putting in the work to make sure that they avoid those temptations. My hope for Jon is that with time, he has to be less conscious. He can become less conscious of putting in the work. You know, like every day I brush my teeth, and when I was 3, it felt like I was putting in the work. You know, now it's just something that I do, and it's not work, it's just part of who I am. And I think that with time and more practice, that's exactly where Jon's head will get to as well. The final thing that I wanted to mention was around, and I don't know if you clocked it, but I really hope you did. So we had that super deep and slightly delicate conversation around race, based on what happened to Jon when he was attacked. To me, it's no coincidence that Jon said part of his recovery came from stopping judging and showing compassion. And I don't know if he knows it yet, but he has not just done that in isolation. This didn't just happen once. This is the whole theme of his story. He stopped judging and showed compassion towards the people that attacked him. That's how he was able to move on. But he also stopped judging and showed compassion towards himself around his food addiction. And that too is how he was able to forgive and to be able to move on. So he didn't just externally forgive, stop judging and show compassion, but he also had to do that work inwardly for himself as well. He had to forgive himself, stop judging himself, be compassionate towards himself in order to recreate his life and become this healthier person who now is out there promoting a very healthy living lifestyle. So here's the thing. Sometimes we think that, you know, what we're doing, it's just for benefit to us. But actually it has this ripple effect out into the wider world. Sometimes we think, you know what, I'm offering forgiveness to all of you for the bad things that you've done to me. It's not. You're actually doing that for yourself. So, you know, maybe that's a conversation about oneness that we need to have in the future. Because whenever you are putting it out there, you're also getting borrowing benefits in here. And whenever you do it for yourself in here, you are also projecting that new way of being back out into the outside world. And that's everything I wanted to summarise around my interview with Jon. What did you think of it? I freaking loved it. Anyway, make sure you give this video a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Give it 5 stars if you're listening on a podcasting platform there. And make sure you leave a comment. I'd love to know your feedback on this one. I've got, at the moment, 3 others that I'm editing. And There are no words. They are so unique, such beautiful, extraordinary, in some cases devastating stories. I cannot wait to get those shared with you in the next few weeks. So make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast and our YouTube channel in order that you are informed and notified when the next episode becomes available. But for now, thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will see you all next time. Bye. The People Building podcast was produced and edited by Gemma Bailey. You can find out more information about our products and services on peoplebuilding.co.uk, where you can also join in the conversation around specific episodes. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. It should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, we do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organisation that is presented within the podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.